Hi, and welcome back to another edition of Inside Great Lakes Sailing. My name is Greg Norman. We are really fortunate today to have with us U.S. Sailing Youth Director, John Pearce, who I believe is in Rhode Island, if I'm not mistaken, talking to you from there right now.
That's right.
We're all having these conversations sort of with the pandemic over Zoom. And John, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time out.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's nice to connect, and especially at this point where I'm stuck at home working remotely. It's nice to talk to sailors via the Zoom chat here.
We're going to talk a lot about junior sailing and lots of questions I have as to how you operate and stuff. But maybe let's just talk a little bit about you. Now, you're from Central New York, I think Ithaca, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Yeah, I grew up in Ithaca, New York, on the Finger Lakes, sailing on Lake Cayuga, and got into the sport through summer camp at the Ithaca Yacht Club, and got hooked quickly and just kept coming back, all summer, every summer. And that led to, becoming an instructor, trying all different types of racing, and then eventually heading off to do college sailing at Hobart College.
Mom and dad sail?
Yes, recreationally. They have a Catalina 22. My dad had a windsurfer growing up. They never raced, but they get out in the lake every summer.
Do you remember as an adult that first time that it was like, okay, now this is something I'm going to do for a long time? Remember that one point?
I do. Yeah, I think it was in my first summer of sailing camp towards the end of the summer on a windy day, and I was one of the only sailors that was able to go out. And I was like, wow, I guess I'm getting kind of good at this. And I was out there, and it was just ripping, or it was probably blowing about 12 knots, but on Lake Cayuga in the summer, that is ripping. And just had a great sail in the Opti by myself with one instructor following around in the coach boat, and I was like, this is cool.
Now, you won a national championship at Hobart as a sailor or as a coach?
As a coach. As a sailor, we were third place, and third place in the co-ed nationals and second place in the team race nationals. And I came back after my senior year to be the assistant coach, which was a great experience and something that led me to many years of college coaching after that. And that year we were fortunate enough in 2005 to win the team race nationals and the co-ed fleet racing nationals.
Now, in between Hobart and U.S. Sailing, I think you were at Stanford and...
Yeah, Stanford, Dartmouth, and George Washington University. So started out as an assistant coach at Hobart and then at Stanford. Did an Olympic campaign in the laser and got fifth place at the Olympic trials in 2007. And then headed up to Dartmouth College and was the co-head coach up there, and then moved down to George Washington in DC and was the head coach there for 4 years.
Was your love lasers, I'm assuming?
Yeah, from the beginning. Kind of grew up sailing lasers, went to college sailing, and then after college sailing, I still had the bug and really wanted to see how far I could take it. And the laser was, kind of the most available, also the least expensive boat option for me at that point. I've never quite had the stature for it. I'm only 5'9", so had to work really hard to try to up my game in the breeze. But always loved the light air days, and just had a great time sailing that boat for many, many years.
I didn't recognize until I started talking about 49ers and various kinds of events. We have a couple of my junior sailing coaches are trying to campaign for the 2024 Olympics.
Awesome.
And talking with the experts, body size is really important. It's like, you want to be tall in basketball, you want to be large in football. So I jokingly said to one of them, I said, there's not a lot of small boats for big fat guys like me. So just, you get the point. It just, there is a fit, and you really have to know what that fit is. Now, from college sail coaching, you went to U.S. Sailing. What was that trail? How did you get there?
It was the job of the youth director opened up about 4 years ago, and decided, hey, that sounds interesting. I've always been passionate about youth sailing, done a lot of coaching, outside of college. I would often do youth coaching in the summers and things like that. And, kind of applied on a whim, to be honest, and got an interview and turned out to be a really good fit. And it's been really exciting because I joined U.S. Sailing at a time where there's been a lot of sort of readjustment of how our staff structure is structured, and a huge emphasis on youth sailing in particular. So it's been a really fun ride so far.
You have a math degree from college, and you're kind of in the education world. And do they combine, or does it just work out that you're doing what you love?
I think I'm doing what I love. I mean, I think the math degree does come in handy for sort of working on logic and trying to track, data for the things that we're doing. But really, my strongest kind of attribute for this job is my love for sailing and my sort of background and experience in the sport, and learned so much just from interacting with some of the top people in the sport all along the way through college, and especially since joining US Sailing. Just always trying to pick up that next idea that might fit in somewhere and connect the pieces.
What is your job? What's your mission statement as the youth director for US Sailing? What is it that you are
Yeah.
responsible for?
Well, I mean, the simplest answer is that we have quite a few programs, US Sailing programs that are youth focused. So all of those youth focused programs fit within the youth department. And that includes the instructor and coach training programs. So the small boat level 1 instructor training program is the biggest one, but we have quite a few other instructor and coach trainings and continuing education. So that's focused on the youth instructor space. We have some regattas, 5 US Sailing championships that are national championships each summer, and about 30 USA Junior Olympic Sailing festivals that are regional fun events and competitive events. And then we've added a few things in the last couple of years. We have a really exciting app project called the Skill Up app, which is meant to connect instructors, coaches, and sailors and their parents with the best training materials, the skill progression, so that there's a clear pathway there.
Right.
And we also launched a really cool program this year called the Siebel Sailors Program, where we've, through a really generous grant from the Siebel Foundation, we've been able to provide 120 boats, RS Viva sailboats, to community sailing centers around the country, and hire 5 expert coaches to do direct programming at those community sailing centers.
How much of your job is operational and how much of your job is sort of research and educational, moving to what's the next best thing?
I'd say it's probably 75 to 80% operational.
Okay.
I think we have a big business sailing. We serve a lot of sailors, and we have a vast membership that is everything from Olympic sailors to weekend warrior to recreational cruisers, and the full gamut. So our staff works really hard to keep the gears turning and keep the operation going. The part I love is getting out on the road and being at regattas, being at sailing centers, interacting with kids and getting to know and thinking about, like you said, sort of what is the next best thing? Where can we go to next? And luckily our team, our staff team has grown over the years with those new programs that we've launched. A really good brain trust of people who are sort of thinking about how to optimize things in the right direction.
When sailing becomes a job, does it hurt the hobby? I
Um,
say that as a ski coach. I spend more time coaching than I do skiing. When I'm used to be a skier, I spend a lot more time skiing than obviously working as a coach.
yeah. I mean, I don't get out on the water as much as I would otherwise if I were, I don't know, carpenter or something like that.
Right.
But, but I definitely get my satisfaction out of being involved with the sport in general, and I think through coaching, I'm sure you can relate to the fact that over time you come to appreciate the sport and kind of get excited about seeing it done well rather than doing it yourself well. And so that's kind of where I'm at. I like going to a sailing program or going to a regatta and seeing, a great instructor in action, or seeing a great race take place at a high level regatta, and just a battle for whoever's on top. But it's a job and it's a business. And I think especially right now, I mean, with everything that's going on in the world with the coronavirus and stuff, we are buckling down, trying to evolve our business as fast as possible to this new situation, and also try to help our membership as much as possible weather this storm, because it's really quite real right now.
How many kids do we have registered with US Sailing? And I say kids, anybody under the age of, college aged all the way down to maybe kindergarten. How many kids are actually registered?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. So US Sailing has about 45,000 individual members. Most of those are adults. And In fact, there's only about 4,000 or 4,500 youth members. And that's something that I am trying very hard to change. And we've got a lot of things working on, because currently you don't really become a member of US Sailing as a kid unless you start racing. And my goal is to change that dynamic so that you become a member of US Sailing when you start to learn to sail. And US Sailing starts with you at a very beginning level, and your parents and your friends and everybody. And that would be a much bigger number. And also, I think that's our biggest impact. Like, if we can retain those 8 and 10 and 12-year-olds, even a slightly higher percentage of them, that will have a compounding effect over time and grow the sport, 10 years down the road.
Is there what's the membership charge for? Is there a child's membership within US Sailing?
There is, yes. The youth membership is $30. The adult membership is, I believe, 65 or maybe 70.
Okay, so for 30, what am I getting?
Right. Well, historically, for $30, you've been getting the ability to go race in certain competitions, and that's why it was connected to basically the youth members were the racers. What we're working on changing now is lowering that fee, but having everybody within a youth sailing program, all the participants, become members as a group, and it's baked into your youth sailing registration fee. And that's the Skill Up app project we're working on, and we're basically going to be pushing out this summer and going into the fall, is a tool that allows all those kids who are members of US Sailing to be connected better to their coaches, and it gives the program directors a much better tool for tracking their skills.
Okay. One of the things that, again, I'm the new guy on the block. I took over a junior sailing program, and with no racing background of any kind. Beer can racing in San Diego Bay doesn't account for, doing what you guys did.
Well, sounds pretty fun.
But I'm real involved in the ski world, and was involved in the ski world for a long time, and I was also involved in USA ski racer education through USSA. My point is that we always looked at various organizations. US Lacrosse has some of the best educational properties in the country. They just do a really good job with their training. When I looked at our US Sailing 101 program, all of our instructors are required to be certified because, you're asking them to teach. The follow-up to that is that everybody would say from other clubs, most of our guys are certified. Well, if you broadcast that you're certified, but it turns out that 3 of your guys aren't, are you lying? And then part of that goes back to, which is what I want to talk to you about, is we use the 101 as a Bible because it's such a good manual to work with. And I think it gets lost sometimes because it's not used. It should be used literally, not figuratively. If that makes any sense.
It does. Yeah. And I think there's that go into that. I totally agree with what you're saying, because the age-old problem of this is how we have always done it. So the instructor teaches the same way that they taught, or maybe a little worse, probably, because you lose a little bit of knowledge in that feedback, and you end up with a slightly less polished product over time. The other piece is, the certification course. So our level 1 certification course, 4 days. You do it once. And so that's great. There's a lot of good content in there. There's a lot of safety stuff, a lot of learning styles, but it's only one discrete learning opportunity.
Right.
And what I'm trying to do, especially through this app project, is have a constant connection with the instructor and with the student to make sure that they're kind of keeping going. Because, if you leave your training course and you learned a bunch of stuff, but then you put the book on the shelf and you just go back to doing what you've always been doing, nothing's really changed.
We use the Bible, and I'm a new coach, new to sailing. So you're watching the way people are operating. So there's no syllabus, and we take 3 kids out of high school who are unbelievable high school racers. We turn them loose with 7 or 8 young guys and an optimist. And the first 3 days are fine, and then they get to the 4th day and there's no wind and they're not sure what to do. So they take them for a boat ride, or they take them swimming, which is all fine and dandy, except now the second week they're taking them for a boat ride and they're taking them swimming and they're not teaching them sailing. Right. So one of the things we've worked off season about is we have 3 people in our club that are all college professors. we're now working with the coaches coming back, working with our adult sailing program, and trying to put some paradigms together and some tools, some real honest to goodness tools on, okay, it's Thursday and it's 1 o'clock and I don't know what to do.
Yep.
We've set them up for failure because we never coached them. And then when they do things that maybe are a little odd, which again, riding in Easterly, which is our skiff, for the 9th time in 3 weeks, that's not what parents are paying for, right?
Yeah.
So can there let them go home early rather than do something that has no value? We don't want to let them go home early, but the idea that we're turning these guys loose without any educational tools, and I think back to my original part of my coaching career, it took me 10 years to become an average head coach. And now we're asking 17, 18, and 19-year-olds where parents are paying $1,500, $1,600 for lessons. We lose that part of it, which is I see you shaking your head, so I think you probably agree.
Totally. Well, I think it's, there's also a lot of environmental or circumstantial challenges that are not making this any easier. Right. The average age of instructors is getting lower because there's increased pressure on college students and post-college students to be doing career-oriented, internships and things like that. So it's a lot of younger, fresher instructors. And so I think that, like you said, there needs to be a toolbox, playbook that they can draw from. We're trying to put as much of that as we can into this app project that it's at their fingertips. But a lot of it also comes down to sort of the continuing education, the mentorship. They're going to learn a heck of a lot if they can interact with college professors that you're talking about at your club, and get some tips there. Because that human touch, like, I guess what I'm saying is, you can't just rely on an app to do it for you. There's still a huge human element to all of this. And, we need to mentor these kids and these new instructors and bring them into the fold to become better coaches.
Well, I think part of that discussion is I keep telling everybody that I would fail in the classroom. I can coach. I think I'm a pretty good coach, but I'm not an educator. And education is different than, like you said, you have a math background. I have a journalism background, so I can tell you how to structure a sentence really, really well. But I got to turn to educators to understand process. And I'm passionate about that, and I think that's one of the things that we're changing a little bit here, is that the new guy raising his hand who doesn't necessarily have the background, but God, that seems like a decent idea. It makes more sense. Yeah. Now we connect with somebody like you, and what you do is to some extent validate what it is that we're trying to accomplish, because we're kind of on the same page.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think the tone at a lot of the big sort of national meetings and things like that, we just had the Sailing Leadership Forum back in February, which has 500 or 600 attendees from all over the country, and the tone there is very much in line with what you're saying, which is that we need to promote the whole sport, try to get kids sailing all the different types of boats, make sure they're getting really good quality instruction early on, provide different opportunities, including racing opportunities at the right times, but not push them into one box or another too early, because it's a lifelong sport, and it really is a lifelong sport. A lot of sports say, "Oh, we're a lifelong sport," but they're not. They're kind of massaging the truth there a little bit. We really are. So we owe it to the kids to make sure that they have a nice long runway trajectory in the sport, so they can keep doing it, when they're my age and your age.
A lot of other sports who have people our age who no longer participate in football, you no longer participate, probably unless it's your softball, but baseball, you can ski, but it's not, you don't play lacrosse. And my point is that we shut down our junior season for an entire week because, there's the Mackinac race. And part of that discussion is that a lot of youth programs that would have volunteers with great expertise are still competing at 50, 60, 70 years old. So there's less bodies than there might be in other sports to be able to bring for that mentoring process. And I think that's something you have to recognize. And I think I'm a perfect example. I'm not a racer, so I've got all this time for junior sailors. When the other guys 2 weeks before the Mackinac, they're worried about their rigging and, overboard process and all the other thing that goes with it. And I think that's part of the sport I think they has to learn from that to some extent.
Well, and hopefully they're taking some junior sailors on the Mac race with them. I think that's another huge factor in sailing, is that it's intergenerational, and we need to emphasize that and capitalize on the fact that the next for like a, teenage sailor who's got all the proficiencies might be to go and crew on the Thistle or the Lightning or the Hobie Cat or whatever with the old guy at the club, or their friend's dad. Go race with grown-ups. It's not just a youth sport.
This is unscientific and it's only my opinion, but it's a great desire to see big boat guys wanting to take out juniors wanting to go out on big boats, and they have a great desire, and they miss in the night because there's programs. I know Bayview in our area has a program where they put a flag up and you can go out and jump on the boat. Now you're 16 and there's 7 guys sitting in the back of a J110, and they're all having stories and talking to each other, and they're all drinking beer or drinking pop,
right.
whatever. And the 16-year-old keeps walking because he's not sure if he wants to step over that barrier, the communicative barrier that has to change. So the kids do have that opportunity. I mentioned yesterday to Bruce Burton, who is the Olympic director for U.S. Sailing.
Yeah.
We have a Cal 20 that belongs to our CSA, which is our junior sailing program. Last year it was used 90-some days. Turns out I want to use it this year every day. 5 kids take it out, rotate it so they can get a little bit bigger boat experience than what they're on the floor. Except that one member used it 84 days last year, 85 days last year. He thinks it's his boat.
Wow.
When I went to schedule it, you can't use that boat because I use it. Well, doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the club. Well, nobody's ever used the boat. Well, guess what? There's a guy in town who wants to use the boat now. We're only going to use it between 5 and 7. You can sail it the rest of the day, but you have to take, your refrigerator and all your food and your towels and your linens off the boat. Kind of one of those.
He's living on there, huh?
Well, I'm exaggerating, obviously, but you get my point. It just it changes from that standpoint. I think sometimes they do get lost because they just don't talk to each other. And it's not a matter of bad or good. They just get lost.
Well, you need that you need an advocate, someone making those connections proactively and helping, get that 16-year-old walking on the dock connected with one of those boats. And you also need the sailors, on that boat to be welcoming and conscious of the fact that, to grow the sport, it can't just be their kind of boys club or, I think there's some cultural barriers there too that might make a new youth sailor not so comfortable. But it's such a great community, and that's the biggest strength, is that everybody wants the community to grow, and it's lean on the right people to help out with that. So I totally agree with you on that one.
I tell my instructors if they want to use my boat to go ahead. The worst they do is sink it. I got it highly insured. I get a better boat. It's not too terribly difficult. Are we on an upward trajectory, on a flat trajectory, on a downward trajectory in relationship to our programs, our number of kids that are sailing? It seems like with closing schools in our area, numbers are dwindling for all kinds of programs. The burnout rate has gone up a little bit because of the expectation. But if you take that away, we still have less bodies than we had even 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think, if you look at the participation numbers that we have, which are mostly racing related, in terms of nationally, they're pretty flat. I think anecdotally from talking to junior sailing programs, their younger age groups are quite full. I think it's pretty easy to fill an 8 or 10-year-old class up with summer camp kids. Retention rate is not what it should be, or I think that's the key metric. Is we're doing an okay job getting kids in the door. We should continue to do our best to get them in the door. And a lot of that, the program directors are incentivized to do that because they're looking for those registration fees, make sure that they can run their program. Right. But the retention rate is something that I'm hoping we can measure better if we can get a large pool of youth sailors who are joining U.S. Sailing early on or automatically part of our community through that, and then track their progress for a few years. We'll start to see what the retention rate is. And one goal of mine would be able to have like a national benchmark for retention, and then be able to have, your program at Crescent, you guys can look at where you're at and compare and say, well, let's see, like we're a little better than average, but this other program has a great retention rate. What do they do? How is their program structured?
We have a number of kids that get jockeyed. And last year there was, they got a hold of our list and they start calling our sailors and come over here. And we had, that kind of thing. So you got a limited audience and everybody's, it's not so much that you drop the price, but I think of instructors in our area who make good money. Some of them are making $700-800 a week for 7 weeks. This isn't they're not bagging groceries at Kroger's, and they're out having a good time. And I get that part of it. I wish I would have made that kind of money as a beginning coach. I was lucky enough to get $3 an hour. I'm not lucky to get $3 an hour now with all the coaching, with all the work, if you think of all the work that you do.
Yeah.
But I think the retention is coming back to, what are you providing? What value are you providing? So that was so here's my question. We're trying to provide value beyond the 8, in this case, 9 o'clock in the morning till 3:30 in the afternoon. We're trying to provide more value by having some instructors come back and pay them dollars so that we have an open sale in, the evening for a couple hours, and then Saturdays and Sundays, maybe all morning. So the kids can come back with no instruction. And so here's my question. Are we doing good with Sandlot? Are kids in the boats enough by themselves? Or is that just something that maybe it's just in my brain and nobody else's?
No, I totally agree with you. There's a lot of discussion across all youth sports, which I think you're probably plugged into, about the need for that sort of self-directed learning and the free time. That's when you kind of develop your passion for something, is when you're able to tinker with it and play around. I think the challenge that a lot of sailors run into is that they only have access to the boats if the boats are cloned during official program hours. So like you said, scheduling free sail, Saturday, and having some safety boats out there, making sure it's all clear in terms of where you're allowed to sail to and whatnot. But come on down, take a boat out, bring your dad and show them around. Great way to bring more adults into the sport too. So I think there's a safety concern there. And then I think there's also the perception that learning happens while you're being deliberately instructed, coached, and that having the right coach is going to be the difference maker. Which, having the right coach in the short term will teach you some new skills, and you might see a short-term bump in ability, but in the long term, it's just a blip in the radar, and I think that especially in the more competitive corner of the sport that's really looking for, winning regattas and that kind of trophy hunting mentality, there can be short-term thinking where you've got really young kids. This is true in lacrosse too, really young kids training in a way that is probably more appropriate for a college student or a Olympic campaigner.
Right.
And it's not age appropriate. And in the short term, it'll yield some good results. But in the long term, is that sailor really going to stick with it? Are they learning enough skills across the board to become a great sailor in the long run? I mean, you talk to the U.S. Sailing Olympic coaches, one of their common gripes is that sailors will get to that U.S. Sailing team level or Olympic development level, and there's gaps in their skill knowledge because they weren't exposed to certain things. The compass is the best example of this usually. A compass is very useful sailing tool for all sorts of reasons, navigation and tactics. And if you're 20 and you're one of the top sailors in the country and you've never used a compass before, you're starting from scratch.
There's a problem.
You should have probably been given a compass to screw around with when you were 10 and done some scavenger hunts. And then you probably should have learned to navigate with it in a very basic sense when you were 14. And then when you start racing at a higher level, you're familiar with how it works and you're just learning how to use it for a more tactical approach. So there's a lot of different ways that's true. I mean, there's very young sailors that are champions in their class, but their knot tying skill is basic. They can't dock a boat and cleat. If you give them that 20-footer that you're talking about and tell them to tie it up to the dock, they don't know how to do that.
Right. They'll tie it into the wind. So when they winter weather, there's scratches on the side. I think the one thing they missed too is that I made a decision with our coaching staff this year that we were going to rotate. I noticed that we had some very good coaches last year, but we get one guy with the same 10 kids for 6 weeks. And by the end of the first week, I know that by the time we get to week 3, this kid's lost because these kids just disconnected. If you rotate the coaches,
Yeah.
then you have to be on your toes as a coach, because guess what? It's a different group of kids that you have to consider what you're talking through. And then why aren't the best coaches at the bottom teaching the kids who need it the most?
Yes.
So in this
Took the words right out of my mouth.
guys we have one kid that was at Robert Morris, who's almost an Olympic level sailor, and the idea that he would coach a beginner opti was below him. Well, guess what? There's the class, dude. Go down and have your opportunities. And I think you're going to find two things are going to be true. One, you're going to have a lot of fun because the kids don't know what they need. And then they're going to be really appreciative of the fact that there's somebody who might know a little more than the person that they got or had as a coach, because they're struggling because they're brand new. And
Exactly.
so as you learn that communications, and I know that that's not novel, but at least in junior sailing in our end of the world, it seems to be somewhat novel, even with following your Bible. So I think that has to change.
Exactly. And I think, all of this comes back to what are the practical things that can be done to, kind of change some of these things. And so, as you said, getting your most engaging, kind of best teachers of instructors, spending time with the introductory level kids. I like that idea of rotating. That's a really good one. Offering different types of boats so that kids kind of get forced to learn different skills because they have to hop on a different boat and learn a different job and figure out how to, tie a different knot because, this boat's rigged different than the other one they're used to, not specializing early, but kind of sampling as much as possible. Which again, that in some places that's just not really done much. But if you put a little deliberate effort into it, I heard of some cool camps that they sail a different boat within the fleet every day of the week. So, they're hopping from an Opti to a 420 to that, 20 footer and, back to, maybe a little catamaran or something. And you think of that kid, say they're 10, 11 years old, they're getting the breadth of the sport nice and early. And they might say, oh man, I love that catamaran. That thing is wicked. I want to sign up for that catamaran camp. Maybe they just don't like being single-handed on a boat or, so it's not an exact science, but I think there's a lot of practical thing can be done that will increase that retention rate and then grow the sport in the long run.
We've had a number of conversations locally. You go from Optimus to 420s. It seems to be the transition is a difficult one because you're going from a stub nose boat to a legitimate, race boat. Our high school teams here race 420s. Mm-hmm. Looking at transition boats, it seems to be a subject they want to go to, but cost and is somewhat prohibitive. So what do you see between an Opti and a 420 from a youth director? What do you see as a good transition boat?
Yeah, great question. I think there's a big uptick right now in the Laser 4.7, which is the smallest laser rig, and it has never been very popular in the U.S. Because the Laser Radial. Well, the Laser started out with the Laser Full Rig, which is the adult boat, and then they, and that's what 1975, 74, something like that came out, and then the Laser Radial was introduced, and that's the Olympic boat for female sailors and super popular with youth sailors. The Laser Radial is one of the strongest fleets nationally. But it's still kind of a bear of a boat. It's tough to jump from an Opti-sized kid and jump into the Laser Radial. And if there's any, amount of wind, you're going to feel like you're kind of overpowered. So the 4.7 has been popular in Europe, and just in the last 2 years, a bunch of big regional programs started using the 4.7, and it's a great solution because the 4.7 rig is nice and small and forgiving for a sailor that's maybe 120, 130 pounds.
Sure.
And all you have to do to transition it into a radial is buy a different bottom section and a different sail. So relatively expensive to transition up. So that's a good single-hand option. The boat that we use for the Siebel Sailors program that we selected is the RS Viva, and that's a two-person boat that's really for that same sort of size range, that 120-pound sailors, two sailors in there, and it's much more manageable than a 420. it's easier to write, and it has a little asymmetrical spinnaker, so it's pretty fast and kind of fun to sail. I think the challenge, which you're sort of alluding to with that transition, is that it's a short period of time. Most
Right.
sailors during their growth spurt, they're only going to hit that transition phase for a year or two before they're moving on to the bigger size boat. But it's a critical time period. A lot of decisions are made by young people when they're 11, 12, 13 years old about what they like and what they don't like. So I think it's important that there is a clear option for that age group. And, the Opti is incredibly popular and an awesome platform. Great for learning, great for racing. So that's a great solution as well. But at some point, you size out of it. Or some sailors, they don't want to sail by themselves and do a two-person boat. Kids are social. They feed off the social aspect of sports.
Yeah.
So for some of them, sailing with a friend is going to be way better.
We had at the back of our sailing center, there was just weeds, and I found, I don't know, 3 or 4 420s that had been turned over because, well, they were slugs and they weren't the most up-to-date boats. So we pulled them out, cut the grass, the membership cut the grass, and do these things float? Yeah, they float just fine. Well, why aren't we using them? Well, we had just bought 3 new, we had a guy go all the way up to Bristol and bought 3 new 420s last year, brought them back. Why aren't we using these other boats? Well, they're tugboats. I said, so you're going to tell me that there's a performance difference? Okay, again, not knowing. Yeah, well, why don't we take the best boat and put a number 1 on it, and the worst boat and put a number 15? And if the worst kid in the 420s or the least talented kid in the 420s gets a choice between standing on shore and being in boat 15, still rigged out perfectly, and
Yeah,
and fix it like it's supposed to be. May not be as fast as the one we just bought for 15 grand. What's wrong with being in boat 15 instead of standing on the shore?
absolutely.
Well, once they got in boat 15, they went, wow, and now all 15 boats went out because, well, they wanted to sail instead of trying to take your numbers. And that part didn't make sense to me. It was just a common sense kind of an approach, and our fleets use it. And we sometimes have to share boats between yacht clubs because we'll have a big event and we have 15 and Grosse Pointe Yacht Club has 16 or 17, and sometimes you got 30, 40 kids that are racing, 50 kids that are racing, so you share boats.
Yeah.
Well, we don't want boat 15. Well, then fine, let them stay, let them not compete. I mean, I've got a 30-foot O'Day that I love dearly, and it's a flying front room. That's really what it is. I got the nicest television, and it's decked out. You'd want to spend a week on it. Well, I strip it down so I can sail faster. I don't want to sail faster. I want a nice, so it's just that it's providing them with that opportunity. But by bringing more boats on, we got rid of some Optis that were just dogs because they were just gone. There was nothing left to the. So part of it's having good equipment is important as well.
It is, and I think variety of equipment. I mean, that's what I advocate for. Is that there's the word pathway gets thrown around a lot, and it's in my job description about 100 times. So I've put a lot of thought in the last 3.5 years about what does a pathway mean. And in our sport, there's some tricky distinctions to make. So briefly to summarize my thoughts on that, there's a competition pathway, right, which is local, regional, national, international. The difficulty of races that you can progress through. Kind of that pyramid approach, right, where you work your way up. But since our sport's a lifelong sport, there's really not a huge rush to get to the top of that pyramid at a young age, because honestly, you look at the most successful adult sailors, they often were middle of the pack as kids. So if the outcome we want is the best adult sailors, we probably shouldn't necessarily be measuring their performance too much. We should measure it. I mean, we might as well go out there and race for sure, but that's not necessarily the best metric, right? The other pathway option is equipment, which is what we were just talking about. Sail this boat, then sail that boat, then sail that boat. But again, I have some challenges with that because there's so many boats to choose from, and that's the fun of sailing, is all the different cool boats that you can try. And if we just say that this is the pathway, you as a kid are going to sail this boat and then this boat and then this boat, we're really kind of shortchanging the kids, in my opinion. I think we should try to incorporate as many boats as possible, and that's going to make them more creative, better all-around sailors. So what I like, my preference when it comes to pathways is talking about a skill pathway. And these are the skills at the foundational level. These are the skills at the intermediate level. These are the more advanced skills, and those kind of branch out into specific goals. If you want to be an offshore sailor, your advanced skills are going to be a little different than if you want to be a dinghy champion or an Olympian or a college All-American. If you want to be a recreational sailor and you're not interested in sailing around the world or winning the Olympics, there's still some advanced skills that you should know when it comes to navigation and seamanship and stuff like that.
Yes.
And so that's sort of what I've been advocating for, and I think U.S. Sailing is really pushing forward is a skills-based approach. And from there, once you're very skilled, as long as you're skilled and you love the sport, you can do anything you want in the sport. The world's your oyster. Nice to have a little money in our sport as well, so you can buy the toys. But
I have a very specific paradigm. When I took this job, my first question, and it's only because it comes out of the ski world, can a kid who's 9, 10, 11, is there a path to the Olympic team? And I asked that question up to a number of people. We've got some big-time guys here, Wally Cross. We've got, Grosse Pointe Yacht Club, Bayview. Those are some, outstanding crescent. We're some really good sailors. And I got 10 different answers to the same question, but I never got a conclusive answer. And here's my point. When we all started back skiing, we all started coaching years ago, our hills are 400 feet high here. That's as big as they get. And if you're in the Detroit area, they're 200 feet of landfill. Okay, if our head kids want to go to the Olympics, is there a path? We've had one guy in 50 years ever make the Olympic team. It turns out his dad owned Big Sky, Montana, as well as the Boyne areas. So he spent his winters in Big Sky, Montana. Can you replicate mountains? So we'd go in the summertime out to Mount Hood. We would go out there. And then we go to big races in the wintertime, age group races. And for the first half of the hill, we were competitive. We lose down at the bottom half of the hill because we didn't ski as many gates. We didn't ski in oxygen. We didn't ski at altitude, all the things that make for that. So we decided to make it mileage, because if I go up and down my hill 40 times and you go up and down your hill 4 times, we're still skiing 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 vertical feet. And in my case, I'm actually being better because I'm getting stronger. So you put kids on a rope tow instead of putting them on a chairlift, so they'd have to hang on and get stronger as they go through the process. Well, as it turned out, we had this metamorphosis where Michaela Schifrin and Lindsey Vaughn are 2 good examples of girls that came out of the Midwest, that came out of our junior USSA, Central USSA program here. 2 of the best women that have ever skied, and they would tell you their time at smaller hills, both in Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and it was opportunity. We didn't have, obviously we have the Great Lakes. My point, nobody can answer me to this question, is that can we take a kid who's 10 and get to the Olympics? And it's a disjointed model where, at least in the ski world, we have a pipeline now from this area where we can. So the argument is, well, we can't take 20 kids to the Olympics. Well, 20 kids aren't going to make the Olympic team. 1 kid is. And if there's still a pipeline to that, it'll bring everybody along with it, because that'll be the example that, oh, he can. And we have the examples from the old days, but we don't have them from now.
But if I'm not mistaken, isn't USA Skiing considering revise their pathway completely because it's too narrow?
Yes.
I mean, my concern with people want a pathway that's a conveyor belt. You get on here and it brings you here.
Yes.
Right. And my concern is that in the real world, it's neat and tidy is what people want to see, but it's not realistic. I mean, I interviewed Trevor Bird and Andrew King from the American Magic American team last summer at the U.S. Youth Championships, and Andrew is an Olympian as well. And I asked them both, tell me you at age 15. And Andrew said, oh, I was on the circuit. I was about to win my first youth championship. I was, really learning from so-and-so and so. And Trevor said, I didn't sail.
Wow.
Okay. Bora Galari, your neighborhood, was not a stud in sailing at age 15. So my concern is that we, especially as Americans, we want this very prescriptive model. Start here, go here, insert ingredients as such. And my opinion is that the best sailing nations in the world have a sailing culture that builds complete sailors. You look at New Zealand, Australia, these well-rounded sailors who can hop from to boat to boat. So I guess I advocate for something a little different. Now, if the short answer to your question is, if a sailor who's a teenager wants to aspire for the Olympics, they should start sailing the types of boats that are sailed at the Youth Worlds.
Right.
So that's the Laser Radial, the 29er, the International 420, the NACRA 15, and the Techno Windsurfer. And that is what our Olympic development program for U.S. sailing is built around, those Youth Worlds classes. And what's right now is that there's a large group of sailors who started in those classes 5 or 6 years ago, who at that point were teenagers. They're now in the 20s, and a big group transitioning into the Olympic class. With LA 2028 coming up in 8 years, there's a huge opportunity for sailors right now to transition into those Youth Worlds classes and then the Olympic classes and kind of pursue that Olympic dream.
I'm not advocating necessarily for a pipeline that only allows one person to go to the Olympics. My point is that there's a pipeline that's consistent to have growth, and so that growth isn't always based on money. And that kind of is my point. And that's I should qualify and clarify that.
Got it.
We opened a pipeline for skiing that was dead because they said, well, you can't do it unless you move west. Well, we didn't have the money to move west. We figured out another direction, and we worked it out, and it turned out to be that there's different ways to skin the cat in this particular point. So when I have the discussion, if we're losing kids, what are we aiming for other than, well, we want you to ski we want you to sail when you're 25. Great mission statement. But you grow by having more, and the way you grow is by having more opportunity, and it shouldn't always be money based, and that's kind of my point. So it's from that perspective. And so when you're asking the question of the people running junior sailing and you can't get that answer, then it becomes kind of disjointed, and you can't run a program that's arbitrary from year to year if there's no model. That's kind of my point.
Yeah, that point well taken. Absolutely right. I think the being specific about what the path is, even if it is a broad path or a skills path, and then kind of what the milestones are in terms of, if you want to pursue, the highest levels, here's what you should do at this point, the benchmarks along the way. And I think to the point of finances, that is a huge challenge. I think that, sailing needs to be supported by sailors. If our, top contenders are going to be successful, and even the grassroots contenders who are coming up, they need support from their clubs, from their communities, because the expense of, say, transitioning from a 29er into a 49er is significant. These boats are not inexpensive. That being said, a big part of the expense of the Olympics and an Olympic campaign is travel and coaching. And again, with the LA 2028 opportunity, a whole lot of great sailing is going to be happening in California every summer from now till that Olympics. There's going to be several Olympic class regattas out in California that will draw in the international talent. Each summer, currently the plan is that each summer there'll be a Long Beach Olympic class regatta, a San Diego Olympic class regatta, and a San Francisco Olympic class regatta. So, my advice for kids and teenagers and people who are thinking about that Olympic dream is go west each summer and go, dip your toe in the water against the top contenders.
Yeah. You have to sail. You have to do whatever sport you're involved with. You have to always play above your head. Yeah. It's the only way you get better. And if you don't play above your head at that level, when you finally make it to that, let's say a statewide or a regional-wide ability, if you're not banging your head against the better competition, you can be that great, big, huge guy in a small pond, but it doesn't matter because our experiences, and we used to do a lot of age national group champions at Lake Placid for various disciplines. I used to coach slalom, and you'd have 10 of the best 14-year-old slalom skiers in America. And there was one kid on the hill before everybody else, and there was the same kid on the hill when everybody else was done. The other 9 came from academies, and they were all great skiers, but they didn't have whatever it is that God put into that kid, right?
Yeah.
And I had an old coach tell me at a very young age, he said, don't worry about that kid, because if they shut the lifts down, he's walking up the hill. And that's not true of the other 9, and that's a selective process that Darwin talked about that doesn't change the process.
It's true.
And you just leave those kids alone and make sure that you kind of keep them like bumper pool, keep them moving in the right direction so that you don't overburden them. And one of the things that I've learned from U.S. sailing could learn from skiing, 10 years ago, 50% practice, 50% training.
Mm-hmm.
We're now up to a model where it's 75% practice and 25% training. And the point of practice meaning that they just go out and ski. And if you tell a bunch of kids, we're working on this skill today, but they're out free skiing on their own with their friends or sort of a modified practice schedule, they're practicing the skill that they're going to use in training later that afternoon because they don't want to be embarrassed. They want to get better at it. But it's not somebody standing over the hot stove, with a whip beating on them. And I think the lesson that we're trying to do here is exactly that. And if you look on our website, we changed our acronym for our paradigm is SMILE, and I've got various S means, and we have a SMILE rule. And if you're in a boat and you're not smiling, I take you off the water. And last year, I took a young lady off the water, and everybody saw that I took her off the water. Well, I was taking her in for a popsicle. We have one of our stipends I have a big refrigerator at our sailing center, and it's full of popsicles. When our flag asked why I had a $300 stipend in our budget for popsicles, I said, because I spent $300 last year on popsicles. I said, if a kid wants a popsicle, he goes and opens a thing and has a popsicle. And if he doesn't pick up the stick, it's a process and it's a very simple thing. So we have Popsicle Friday. Everybody goes home with a popsicle. Now it may seem like a crazy thing, right? But when you're
it's popular with adults too. You give them an ice cream and they're pretty happy.
Yeah. And it's an association. That's really what we're talking about. Just having fun. And
I think the practice ratio that you bring up is, that's so true in sailing, just like any sport, and as you said, I think it's often recommended that it's a 70% practice time and 30% competition time. And
would you repeat that, please?
It's usually said that it's a 70% practice and 30% competition is the right ratio.
I had you repeat it because I want to take this clip and I want to send it to our DYRA director,
please,
who's coming from the U.S. Sailing, who comes from the youth director for sailing education for U.S. Sailing. I want to send that clip and say, hey, see, I wasn't wrong.
No, you're not wrong. And the practical challenge is, though, that most places in the country have a pretty short summer sailing season.
True.
And they have a lot of clubs who traditionally host a regatta.
Right.
So it becomes a adult-oriented conversation of, we have X number of regattas that we want to hold. How are we going to calendar them? Okay, we'll do this on Tuesday, that on Friday. Rather than looking at it from the kid's perspective, which is, what's the right amount of racing for these kids? How many regattas do we want to have total? Okay, well, who can host, whatever it is, who can host the best regatta? Or maybe you rotate from one year to the next. We'll host this year, you host next year. It's so much harder to trim and edit the calendar than it is to add something.
Right.
But that's exactly what needs to happen in a lot of regions in the country. And it's not less sailing, it's just more practice time.
Focused.
Yeah.
Listen, this is my last question. This has been such a terrific conversation. I really do appreciate all of your insight, and it's just been fun. And I think people will get fun. They'll get some really good insight from this. But if you had that magic wand, looking forward 12, 18 months, what's on your radar? What do you see coming, and what is it that you're working on that's going to make us better as club members?
Great question. Well, I would have answered that question completely differently about 6 weeks ago. Right now, I think the key thing is supporting club and junior sailing programs through this sort of shutdown period and then the restarting period of getting back out on the water. There's a lost hours out there. I think there's a lot of lost revenue for junior sailing programs. That's going to mean that hopefully the donors out there, the people who are capable of supporting the sport, will support their local sailing centers to help them get through this. Because honestly, I'm a little concerned just about not losing any of our key pieces of the puzzle and making sure our community stays big and strong. That's where U.S. Sailing's at. A couple of things that we're doing right now, kind of to that end, is revamping the level 1 instructor course and a lot of the other instructor training courses to be partially online, so that candidates can complete a good chunk of the course ahead of time, and as soon as the season opens and we can get back on the water, we can complete those on water and in-person portions more quickly. So that's a huge undertaking. It's happening right now. We're also really focused on this interim period, kind of providing some useful tools and some of this kind of conversation, starters. Our web called the Starboard Portal. I don't know if you've seen that yet, but it's got all the U.S. Sailing videos. We have live streams every day of different topics. There's some stuff in there for kids as well. A new program called Mr. Childers Neighborhood, which is kind of like Mr. Childers Boathouse, which is kind of like a Mr. Rogers thing, but for sailing, and it's good stuff. It's really fun to watch. Now, all that being said, that's very short term. I think looking 12 or 18 months out, I would love to have the model continue to shift where U.S. Sailing and the member organizations are working together at that introductory learn to sail level, using this skill up system that we're designing and rolling out this summer, and getting that more holistic picture of what's happening in the sport. One of the unfortunate truths right now is that no one can really tell you how many kids are learning to sail every summer. That information just doesn't exist. And so I think we fly blind a lot of time. We rely on our hunches or educated, conjectures as to what's best for the sport. We need to be more data driven. If we can track who the sailors are, what type of sailing they're doing, when they're dropping off, and then be targeted in filling those gaps, that will have the long-term effect of, better retention rate. And, when we talk about retention, the more athletes you have, the better your elite pool of athletes will be too. So it connects to that Olympic discussion and any kind of high level racing, because if we need to have the biggest pool of potential high performance athletes that we can in order to be successful at that top level.
If you get a chance, Brian Gumbel on HBO's Real Sports did a whole thing on Norway, and it turns out, did you see it?
Oh yeah, I love it.
And they asked the guy who was actually had come from Salt Lake City, had been part of the U.S. program, even though he was Norwegian. They said, well, you won more medals in the Winter Olympics than both the Russians and the Americans and so on and so forth. And the conversation, he says, well, how is it that you differ? He says, well, we looked really hard at the U.S. model for skiing. And he said, we did the opposite. And they don't keep track of wins and losses at an early age. And when the kids finally get to be that elite athlete at 14 or 15, then they throw every bit of science they can throw at that athlete to make them world class, which means that there's, skiing and whatever sport they're involved in. And Norway has become a monster in winter sports. And it turns out that they're now coming from behind in soccer. They're coming. So the idea that an entire country can get behind the idea of smiling and enjoying it by not putting pressure on of these kids, it's a remarkable lesson for us at a time when, every kid's got to be at Harvard Leadership School and be an All-American, baseball player. And I think that's part of the process, because they've lost the love of it. I hope and then the other part of it is, I think to some extent for our area, is that there has to be a revolution in the process of junior sail coaching, not the technical aspects of it, but in the retention of just making it more fun. And if you're not doing that, then you're going to continue with a burnout rate that is, way above the national average. So,
yeah, I agree. And I think, the one of the coolest things about my job so far has been interacting with the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, the USOPC. I've gotten to go to Colorado Springs 3 times now for various conferences and trainings, and interact with all the education and youth sports folks from different sports. And you might think that, oh, the U.S. Olympic Committee is only concerned about that medal count, but they're having the exact same conversation that you just outlined there about how do we make it kid-centric and age-appropriate at the kid levels. And they still have in the back of their mind that this is going to lead to more Olympic medals in the long run.
It absolutely is.
It's shifting that. I think as the key thing is making it data-driven, because everything is a debate until you have some evidence. So I think that's first thing first for our sport is we need to gather better evidence, be more deliberate about tracking, what works versus what doesn't work, and then provide some more clarity on here's the recommended model, here are the variations on that model that you can do at your local level. I think one of the cool things about Americans is that we're very opportunistic and entrepreneurial. So we never want to take away the of a sailing club to do it their way and try something different, go rogue, be a vanguard. That's great. But we do want to provide them with the benchmarks of here's what the evidence says, here's what works, here's the toolkit. I think one of the things I think about a lot too is that it's not necessarily just the sailing hotspots that need to be focused on. It's all the smaller parts of the country, the really small pop clubs that may be on our small lake somewhere, and they run youth sailing, 6 weeks of summer. And somewhere in that group of, 50 kids is a passionate sailor in the making, and are we helping that kid connect to the sport in the long run?
Yeah. The most fun job I have at the moment as a volunteer is sort of spewing all this stuff that we've talked about to a bunch of people who don't understand, coming from a guy who says he's the worst sailor in the room. And I think that's the lesson, and that you can learn from them. And one of the things I would tell you is that having now to have to dissect the 101 manual, coaching manual that you guys have put out, I'm in other sports, and I think it's as fine a teaching tool as is made out there. I mean, it's a phenomenal. I've become a better sailor because of it, and it wasn't something I ever focused on. I could take my boat out, I could have fun, I could come back and not die, but now I'm starting to understand why guys that are friends of mine now that have flashlights at night so they see sail shape. I thought they were nuts, but and I say that as a complete novice, but that's kind of the point. And if kids can see the old guys smiling and enjoying it and having fun and having a popsicle, then it's like, what's that? He's old enough to be my grandpa, but I believe that's infectious. And the conversation I've had with you today has been the most fun conversation I've had in a long time. And it makes you want to go right now and find a bunch of kids and get back to it. So thank you for your passion, number one.
Yeah.
And it's nice to hear that maybe we're not on the wrong track. So I'm telling you right now, this has been the best conversation I've had maybe on this show. And that includes some pretty big guys. So thanks so much for getting me. And
I'll just pitch that in the Starboard portal right now on the US Sailing website, that's where all the videos are. There's a presentation I did 2 weeks ago called Squaring the Pyramid. That's all the same kind of topic of youth sports and learning from going on in other sports. And I will say too that, US Sailing, we run a whole lot of professional development conferences every year, a national coaching symposium each fall, a leadership forum each winter. So it's a great place to go. Everyone else who's having these same conversations, and a lot of times coming out of those meetings is where we have that next idea or that next step that makes a difference.
Well, listen, thanks so much for your time, and I'm hoping that we can get you, or if you're sometime in the neighborhood this summer.
Sure.
Love to have you out and get you out on a boat. And I don't drink, but my cooler's usually full of something that's not adult beverage, as it were.
I'll take boat 15. That one sounds like a real winner.
Yeah. John, thanks so much for your time. And you have
thanks, Greg.
Be safe. Thanks so much.
Take care.